everybody. Welcome back to the Scale with Joy podcast. I want to introduce you to Jay Owen. He's the founder and CEO of Design Extensions. We're going to be talking about all things scaling. He has a really successful marketing agency. He's also a faith-based entrepreneur, and so we'll have a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So in 20 years, you grew a digital marketing agency from just a few $1,000s to millions in sales. What for you has been the hardest part of that journey?
Gosh, there's been plenty of hard parts along the way. I think learning to get out of the way has been really hard for me, and creating space for other people to have opportunities. Realizing that a lot of the old adages of if you want to get it right, you got to do it yourself, just aren't true. And I think me getting out of my own way and allowing other people to have the opportunity to thrive and fail ultimately is has been kind of challenging for me over the years, for sure.
Yeah, I personally find it hard to let other people fail. Like, I'm a rescuer. I don't know if you ever struggled with that. But in scaling companies, I tend to like to swoop in and make sure that they're safe and they don't misstep, and that they don't feel the impact of making a decision that might end up coming back to bite them.
Yeah, I always say I have struggled with that for sure, but I always say that I think one of my responsibilities as a CEO of this company is to create an opportunity where people have the opportunity to fail, and just not fail catastrophically. I don't want anybody failing personally catastrophically, and I don't want the company to fail catastrophically, obviously. um, but I do think that creating a space where it's okay to mess up and then learn from that and improve. I think that's a very valuable thing within a culture, and that's kind of how we operate. Because I can't fix everything. I don't have time, and I don't want to. Frankly, I used to, and now I'm at the point where I want other people to figure it out. I don't. It's easy to want to be the one who has all the answers, and number one, I don't have all the answers, and number two, I'm inhibiting the growth of my team by doing things like that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And it's something that I've definitely had to learn myself. Did you start out when you were in the early stages of creating an agency? Were you the one doing all the doing? Like, were you the marketing expert that was also providing fulfillment?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the early years, I did all the things.
Mhm.
As a lot of people start out kind of as that technician role, if you will, doing whatever it is that their business does, whether it's baking cupcakes or building websites. Mine just happened to be building websites. And so for years, I did all that by myself. Then I eventually kind of hired contractors who helped with some of those things. Then I eventually started hiring actual employees. And now I have a small team that is kind of in-house, plus a large group of contractors that we use depending on what the needs are. So our internal team kind of fluctuates. Right now we're about 15 people, and it's a really great size. I actually really like where we're at now. We've been a little bigger. But it's big enough now that everybody can kind of have some areas that are carved out that they're really good at, but it also is still small enough that we can all have relationships, which is really nice.
That's really nice. I'm looking at the background behind you and I recognize it. For those of you who are listening, it's a gorgeous background. It's worth looking at on YouTube. And there is your core values behind you. And one of them is family. And I know you have 5 kids. So what what are some of the things that you've had to navigate in scaling that has been the most challenging when it comes to your family? Because I feel like that's where, especially people who are very dedicated to their family, that's a lot of times where the rub happens.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I didn't have a family. I was a high schooler actually when I started this business. I was 17, so I didn't have any kids, and eventually got married and then started having kids. And things change. I think in the entrepreneurial journey, there's different seasons of business, and there's different seasons of life. And depending on how those things match up, it can create more or less tension, and you have to kind of figure out how to manage that within the season that you're in. And so. Now I'm at a place where the business runs really well without me, and so I'm able to, and I still do plenty of work, but I'm able to free up space for me to work on what is my best and highest use as part of the team. But also, like last year, we took 30 days off. I took 30 days off with my family, and we toured the country in an RV for a month. I couldn't have done that 10 years ago. And it's just because we have the right systems and the right people and the right processes in place now to allow that. But it's been hard. I mean, I've definitely been in places where, the toughest criticism that I've gotten, like from my wife, she said to me, hey, I feel like you're here, but I don't really feel like you're here.
Yeah.
And that's tough. Like that is not what you want to hear. That is not a healthy sign in a relationship. But it's normal that most people experience something like that. Then it's a question of what am I going to do about it? Am I going to stay here in this place where my kids and my wife don't feel like I'm present, even though I'm physically home? Or am I going to do something to change that? And I would say, I don't have that perfected, but I kind of go through seasons of it. And ultimately, what it's come down to for me, especially with my wife, has been doing my best to over communicate. If I'm in the midst of a really busy project or season or something's going on at work, I need to say that, and not just assume that she knows. And she's very gracious to go, hey, I know you got a lot going on. Why don't you stay a little late and sort that out? And then other days, I'm gonna be home at 3 o'clock and swimming in the pool with the kids. So I think it just depends on what's going on and really good communication both with my wife and with our kids, and intentionally carving out time. I use my calendar not just for work, but for everything. So, I will carve out time to do things with the family ahead of time and block my schedule so nobody else at work can take it. And I think that's really important. It's add a lot of value for me.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever felt that way about your faith too? That it was very much a moment where you realized that carving out that time for God was hard as well, scaling?
Yeah, I think, where my faith struggles is in the middle. It's in the mundane. I think when I'm really struggling, it's really easy for me to like cry out to God and go, "Hey, I need some help here." But also realizing I don't believe that God's a genie in a bottle either. That's just out answering my requests.
Right.
And then on the other end, I also find it very easy when I'm really doing well to thank God for those things. I think it's when it gets just muddy in the middle,
Right.
where I kind of can lose sight of those things. But somebody gave me an analogy for this one time that I thought was really important and has added a lot of value for me is instead of thinking of my faith or even my relationship with God as an item on my schedule, think of it as the schedule, as the paper on which the schedule is written. So
Okay.
everything is encompassed in that faith and in that relationship with God, not just whatever my carved out devotional time might be or my, going to church on Sundays or, like tonight my kids have youth group and I'm going to go, it's like a parent open house. So I'm going to go to that. One of my sons leads worship on Wednesday for the youth. And so those are carved out events. But for me, faith and my relationship with God are really more of like the paper that life is written on versus an entry on the paper.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I've been thinking about that myself recently. I was in a really good morning devotional routine, and then the third baby came during a pandemic, and it was like, it's really difficult to keep that structure. And thinking about it from a place of, I've been trying to think about it more fluid. My
Yeah, and I think that's really important to think about things like that fluidly, because especially in the entrepreneurial or CEO space, is it's easy to like read a book and or watch somebody on their Instagram and think, oh well, that's how they do it. That's how I have to do it. Like you see all these like gurus all the time talking about their morning routines, and I think I've tried all of them, and I've gotten to the point where I'm like, that's just not for me. Like
Yeah.
it is. I've gotten to the point where I go, it's okay, like for me to get up, like check my social media, get a shower, and go to work. That is an okay thing to do if that's what is best for me in this season of life. That's okay.
Yeah.
And but if that's causing problems, if it's making me stressed out or it's costing me a relationship with my wife or with my kids, now I have something I have to fix. But I don't have to, wake up at 4:30 like Brendan Bouchard and like do all these massive checklist items in order to be successful. And I think it's especially when you have kids, like the third kid's hard. I always say that the third one, it's kind of like going from man-to-man defense to zone defense because you're outnumbered, and there's just too many of them. And so trying to figure that out, every child has a different personality. Every season of life is different, and you can't compare yourself, to somebody else. A lot of the people that I kind of follow as mentors or leaders, people like Michael Hyatt or Dave Ramsey or Donald Miller. Those guys are all in very different seasons of their life. Like Michael Hyatt has got 5 children, but they're 5 grown children. As a matter of fact, his oldest daughter just became the CEO of his company. I mean, he's in a different place with him and his wife than I am with mine and and our kids and everything else. And I can't expect that I'm going to be able to mirror where he is. And I think that's the same like in your situation when you have a new baby. Like you got to adjust, and that's okay. And I think a lot of times people think if I'm not doing all these things, I'm not doing it right.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that. This is such a great conversation, I think, for people who are in the midst of either trying to get their lives back on track post pandemic or just still navigating so many of the challenges that comes from working parents and scaling CEOs. I'm in the process of launching right now at the time of this recording. And it's a challenge to try to balance everything. And it's funny that you say some of these leaders that either they're not in a season where they're in the weeds with their family. And I was looking at Michael Hyatt's planner, which I have on my desk right now, and looking at the weekend pages, and I was like, rest, like like I don't
Right.
know Brendan Burchard that well, but I'm assuming he's probably not nursing a baby at 5:30 in the morning. So it is I think really what I hear you saying, which I think is so valuable, which is to not only give yourself grace in the season, but be flexible of when your priorities show up throughout the day. So it may be for me that I used to be able to spend 45 minutes journaling and reading scripture, and now it's a matter of walking the dog and talking to God and
Right.
multitasking at the
That's
same
right.
time, or folding laundry and talking to God, and not being so worried about. And I think for so many of us high achieving entrepreneurs who are scaling, can very much feel like we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing to get the gold star, right? To get the A, because we are high achievers. You have a book called Building a Business That Lasts. What inspired you to write that book, and what are some of the things that are the main takeaways that you really hope people will have when they read that?
It's interesting. The book itself is one of those things where I wasn't sure if I had what it took to write a book. I wasn't sure if I was ready. I've heard people say like, "You should write a book." I'm like, it sounds like a lot of work. Um, and eventually, I was actually at a conference. I was listening to a Simon Sinek talk, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember just thinking like, I just need to do the thing that I thought about doing, which was write a book and create a podcast, which both were by the same title. And I just wanted to share ideas with other entrepreneurs. I think what had happened with our agency is it had gotten to a point where we had grown a lot, which is great, but we also had increased our prices a lot, which is also great. But what it meant was there were a lot of people that I couldn't necessarily serve or help anymore. And I felt like with the book, it gave me an opportunity to speak into the lives of people who might not be ready to jump into the agency side yet. They don't have a, $60, $100, $150,000 a year annual marketing budget to spend with the agency, but I could still give them some ideas in a $20 book.
Right.
And I wanted to help those people. I also think there's value in writing. Like there's value in writing your own ideas. Sometimes I find myself doing things that are contrary to my own advice,
Yeah.
and I think, oh man, I'm preaching this, but I'm doing this. Maybe I should adjust what I'm doing. Even a few minutes ago, when we were talking about this idea of like adjusting things to fit your season and fit your life. One of the chapters in the book is called Ignore the System, but Have a System. And the idea behind that is essentially, you don't have to do things like everybody else or like whoever you follow just because they're doing it. Like, there are a lot of ways to be successful, and success to me might be something very different than success to you or to someone else. And that's okay. And I think my goal in writing the book was to create a vision for people that they go, you know what, I can have a great marriage and raise awesome kids and run a successful, scaling, thriving business that's very profitable all at the same time. And I think that culture kind of dictates this idea if you're not hustling 24/7 and ignoring everybody else in the process, then you're not growing well enough. That's garbage. And could I have grown more and faster if all I did was focus on business? Sure. But that's not my desire or my intent or my vision for life. And I
Mhm.
think it's okay for people to figure out what theirs needs to be. You figure out your own life plan, your own future, your own passions. What do you want things to look like in 10 years? And what needs to be true today in order for that to be true then?
Do you think that this is particularly difficult for faith based people to accept the idea that they can scale a business and still be, quote unquote, a good Christian?
I don't think that that is particularly hard necessarily. The thing I think that some people in faith-based communities might struggle with is the idea of like extreme profit. It's almost like a guilt, I think, in some communities of like I shouldn't be that profitable, I shouldn't make that much money. But I love how Dave Ramsey thinks of this, which is basically you can't be ridiculously, extremely, generous unless you are ridiculously, extremely successful.
Right.
I remember hearing a story one time of a guy who used to work for Tony Robbins, and he was with him on a trip. They were touring an orphanage or something in a third world country, and this was not documented. It wasn't publicized. The only reason this guy knew is because he was standing right next to Tony when it happened, and Tony asked the director of the orphanage, "Hey, what does it cost to run this orphanage for a year?" And he said, "It's about $150,000 is our annual salary." And Tony said, "Hey, I'd like to write a check to cover the next year." Well, you got to make a lot of money if you're going to
Yeah.
be able to write a $150,000 check to cover an orphanage for a year. And so I think in faith-based communities, the idea of profit can sometimes seem like a dirty word.
Yeah.
But wow, when you're ridiculously profitable, you can be ridiculously generous, and that idea is very exciting to me.
Yeah, it is very exciting. I think probably to so many people when they think about it that way. So thank you for sharing that. And in one word, what is the secret to growing your business without sacrificing your sanity?
Whew, one word, gosh. Um, Perseverance.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be willing to know that you're going to mess up, you're going to fail, you're going to fall, and then you can keep going. Like you just got to get back up, and have the right people around you. So I'd say perseverance if I had to pick one word.
So good. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you more?
The best place to find me in general is my personal website, which is jayowenlive.com. That's JAYOWEN live.com. All my links to whatever social media account you want, my book, my podcast, workshops, everything is right there. So jayowenlive.com, best place to get me.
All right. Thanks, Jay, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.